Hope the sound is good. I know it'll take a second or two to get to you, but I wanted to get started here. Thank you. You know, it's funny, it's not even dark here yet, so the fireworks haven't even started here. But I love what Steve had to say. Hopefully, we could do a few fireworks of our own. So I am really excited about being with you tonight. We're going to be back in Matthew. We're going to pick up with really the genealogy, which is not a waste of time. We're going to see that genealogies really serve important purposes, several important purposes, and maybe that'll help us read them a little differently because I know that sometimes they get a little boring, but they really aren't boring. Now, a few people will be bouncing uh, in and out just a little bit. Um, but we're going to start jumping to tonight's lesson and kind of picking up from where we were. Um, and definitely want to shout out a happy Independence Day. Look at the freedom we have. Look what we can do online as of right now and the cool things that we can do to get together and discuss the defense of the faith and even the scriptures freely. So that is truly exciting. You're going to see that first slide up. Now, really, this is picking up from last week, but we're in the genealogy and it fits, and we're going to get into this genealogy a little bit more. So you could follow along on Matthew. Genealogies are always there to serve a purpose. Actually, they serve a few purposes. One of the neat things about genealogies for me is it tells me that individuals are important to God because their names are there. But usually they're arranged by the author through the orchestration of the Spirit in such a way as to prove a point. What we have in Matthew 1:1 is a summary statement of the genealogy that's going to follow. Now, this is really very Hebraic. What you often have in Hebrew writing or narrative is you'll have kind of the headlines and then you'll have the details. And let me just tell you one place where this really kind of shines in the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures. If you ever wondered why you have two accounts of the creation in Genesis 1 and 2, that's the reason, because they're arranged differently. And so Genesis 1 starts with the statement, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, headline, and then you have the details, and then you have Genesis 2 focuses on creation in relationship to humankind. So that's why you have that, because it's really a Hebrewism. What we have in Matthew 1:1 is the headline. Here it is. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, you may have a different reading for the word generation. You guys can type in and chime in at any point, but you sometimes will have generations, the book of the generations. That's because the Hebrew word toldot isn't used here because it's Greek, but the idea is the idea of toldot. So when we talk about a genealogy in Jewish thought, it's a record of the generations. Now, this is designed as a summary statement. So what does Matthew want you to know, and why does he want you to know it in this summary statement before we get into the actual meat of the genealogy? And a lot of times you will have genealogy. Generations is another way of saying that, but that's the way you would do that. A genealogy wasn't an abstract thing to Hebrews. It was a record of the generations leading to a given individual. And so we are really focused on Jesus' humanity here. You will notice that John doesn't have a genealogy at all in it because John is focused on the divinity of Jesus more than the humanity. Luke's genealogy does not occur at the beginning because this is a royal pedigree, and the very beginning of this is designed with the audience that Matthew has in mind. So he is son of David, son of Abraham. It's listed that way. And so what's being stressed here? Well, let's look at it. Okay, we talked about the first 14 generations. Notice the summary statement covers the first section. Not because it's going to cover the other sections, but because the emphasis is on David and Abraham, and the author immediately puts the section that runs from Abraham to David right after the summary statement. So you have the summary statement, and then you have the part of the genealogy that directly corresponds to that. It also works very well in chronological order. Notice also that Matthew does not go from Adam, but Luke does. So Luke goes back to Adam. Matthew only goes back to Abraham. And so we have that first section there. Why Abraham and David? Now, it might be obvious to you, but the focus is on the promise. That's the entire purpose of the genealogy. Now, we're going to take the genealogy from a very unique perspective this evening. Universal blessing is tied to the Abrahamic covenant. We need to understand that. By the way, there are distinct covenants. So when I talk about the Noahic and the Abrahamic and the Edenic. Those are real things. If you want to know when a covenant's happening, look at when God makes a covenant. So I don't subscribe to any reduction of the covenants into a two covenantal theory because these covenants seem to have different aspects to them. Universal blessing is tied. If you go back to Galatians, there's a lot of discussion about believers being sons of Abraham by faith. Universal blessing is tied to Abraham. Now I put Genesis 12, 1 through 3. This is a watershed passage, by the way. I follow the materials from Ken Ham. The only sad part is Ken Ham doesn't think about the fact that the first 11 chapters of Genesis are to get you to Genesis chapter 12. Remember that this is being written to Israelites who spent 400 years in bondage, and they have began to forget their own history. So Moses is trying to say, how did you get here? Well, the first book explains how you got here. And so 1 through 11 is the backdrop for why God even needs to do this. If there weren't human beings and there wasn't a fall and then there wasn't the development of nations and then those nations didn't start to descend into darkness, you wouldn't need a witness nation. And so 12 starts with, now the Lord said to Abraham, get out of your country, the area around Ur of the Chaldeans, which, by the way, had begun to become a center for moon worship. If you want to understand how that works, astrology today really has its basis in the worship and divining of the future through the heavenly bodies. Get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, to a land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. Now, look at that there. The Abrahamic covenant is not just for the descendants of Abraham, but the idea is that Abraham's going to be a source, as well as what comes from Abraham, of universal blessing. Okay, I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. So you shall be a blessing ties to, in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. By the way, families there is the Hebrew word mishpucha. And it can have an extended meaning, but here it's relating to the nations. And that gives us a clue. When God looks at human cultures and he looks at the nations, he looks at them almost as extended family. And so the families of the earth will be blessed. And so why son of Abraham? Because this Messiah, who's going to be the Messianic king, is going to be the one who fulfills the purpose of Abraham to be a universal blessing. Okay? And there it is. Galatians is built on the fact that our position in Christ fulfills the Abrahamic blessing. Paul is making a tremendous point out of this. If you are Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. The promise is the promise given to Abraham in Genesis 12, reiterated and reestablished, but that's what you have. So Paul's entire argument is Abraham came by faith. In order to be in covenant relationship with Abraham, with God, you need to be in line to receive the blessings, the universal blessing of Abraham. And that comes by faith in Messiah. In other words, you're in the blessed community if you're in Messiah. You're outside of it if you're outside of Messiah. Now, again, where is this useful? This is incredibly useful to groups that are legalistic, like the Black Hebrew Israelites, because it isn't about keeping the law. The universal blessing is tied to Messiah. Messiah becomes the channel of blessing and relationship with God. And so the writer of Matthew, which is trying to tell these folks that the Messianic community is Jesus's community, and that's the right community, ties Jesus back to that universal blessing that's promised. Why David? While the universal blessing is tied to Abraham, the theocratic promises of a kingdom are made to David. So this becomes terribly important. So we have two covenants in mind. We have the Davidic, which carries with it the promise of being part of the kingdom, the theocratic kingdom of God on earth. And then you have Abraham, which ties to the universal blessing that God intends for humanity, and that's going to come through Abraham. And Messiah is tied to both. Let's look at 2 Samuel 7, 12 through 16. I will set up your seed after you, who will come from your body. That's important. Physical seed of Abraham. Physical seed of David. So Messiah has to be physical seed of David. Little misspeak here. He will build a house for my name, and I will establish his throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he will be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the blows of the sons of men. But my mercy shall not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from before you, and your house and your kingdom will be established forever before you. Your throne will be established forever. Now that is not fulfilled in Solomon. Solomon is really responsible for the breakup of the kingdom through multiplying horses and wives. By the way, Dr. Michael Rydelnik has done a brilliant job of demonstrating the entire Old Testament canon is God's way of saying he isn't here yet. And so the promises are given to David, but Solomon fails. And when you look at the kings of Israel, here's the way you need to look at them. They failed, so the Messianic king, who is the perfect fulfiller of David's promises, is yet to come. And that's why you have these comments about these kings. Now, they're not all bad, but they don't ever rise to the level of Messiah. And that's one of the reasons that's there. In fact, even good King Hezekiah makes a mistake. So when you're reading Chronicles and Kings, that's something to look for. And that gives you kind of a clue to understanding the structure of those books. But you can see that the theocratic kingdom, I will establish your kingdom. By the way, that means it can't be just a heavenly kingdom, way up there. It's an earthly kingdom, because when did David ever reign in heaven? So the promises to David require earthly promises. And so we have a reason to believe in an actual reigning of God on earth. I don't know how everybody feels about that, but that's just kind of the reasoning that I go through. Now, let's look at this genealogy in a way that very few people do. Okay? One of the big questions is Matthew's writing this to a Jewish audience. Messiah needs to represent God to God, humankind. Not just Jew, but Gentile. So how does that work? Okay. Well, I like to call this, how many Gentile women does it take to make a Messiah? We're going to look at the 4 Gentile women. We're going to look at the purpose that those are included. Now, understand the incredible, crazy wildness of this. This is one of those places where things are sort of a little de novo, new, because Jewish genealogies, especially royal Jewish genealogies, did not include Gentile women. In fact, very rarely do you see women in Hebraic genealogies at all. So let's take a look at this. We're not going to get all the way through it, but we are going to start. Here's the bottom line you need to take away tonight, okay? Jesus represents Jews and Gentiles because there are Gentiles in his genealogy, and so you don't have to be Jewish, which you guys already knew. But see, the cool thing is, all of us are on equal footing in Messiah because Messiah represented both Jews and Gentiles. And to bring the point home, Matthew includes 4 Gentile women in the genealogy. And very interesting in the way he does it. So, why is this a big deal? Because there was an exclusivity that existed within Jewish thought. There was also a tension. See, really in Matthew's day, there was a tremendous tension in how do we deal with non-Jewish people. Why? Because they're under a pagan empire. Jews are dispersed. There's a partial dispersion of Jews. So how do we relate to the other nations? And there was this tension between exclusivity and universality. So I like to point out that there are places where proselytes are welcomed. Okay? It's Every Man's Talmud. I've mentioned the book, page 62. This is a nice saying. Okay? You shall therefore keep my statutes and ordinances. If any man do, he shall live by them. Whence it is deduced that even a Gentile who obeys, that should be Torah, is equal to a high priest. This is very nice. By the way, this isn't inspired. This is Talmud. But I'm saying, okay, there were inclusive statements in Talmud and Jewish thought. There were some exclusive, but there were inclusive. This is an interesting statement. On the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles, 70 bullocks were offered on behalf of the 70 nations. Woe to the peoples of the world who have lost, but do not know what they've lost. This is a real fascinating statement. The statement here is the idea that Israel acted as a priest nation for the other nations who were outside of God to create a kind of covering for the world so that God's wrath didn't totally break out until Messiah could come. This is interesting. This is an area of theology that I think really fascinates me because when you read Jonah, Nineveh is spared on the basis of what? If we say that we require blood atonement, this is a big issue in Jewish circles because they'll point and they'll say, well, look, Nineveh didn't need blood atonement. Why do I? And you can point to verses like this in the Talmud and say, well, actually, your writings indicate that blood atonement was needed by the nations. It's just that he was providing it through the nation of Israel's sacrificial system, which not only had some sort of temporary effect for Israel, but had a temporary effect for the world. It's interesting stuff. We're not going to spend too much time there, but it gives you something to ponder tonight. Here's an evidence, we've seen it before, that Gentiles were not welcomed. The idea that a Gentile studies Torah is worthy of death because the Torah was an inheritance for Israel. Now, why do I do that? Because I want you to see the tension. Matthew's writing this gospel. He's demonstrating that Messiah can represent Jews and Gentiles. And there's this incredible tension. And what does Matthew do? He sticks 4 Gentile women in here. So let's discuss the first of these women. Okay? Judah begat Perez and Zara by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram. Okay? This is verse 3. So our first Gentile woman is Tamar. She's an Abdulite. She is not an Israelite. Okay? She's a Canaanitess. Will there be Canaanites in heaven? Well, I think there might be some. She was originally the wife of Judah's firstborn son, okay, by a Canaanite woman, no less. So I love it when rabbis get all down on Gentile women and get nasty. I've gotten a little nasty back and said, well, be a little careful here, but that's Tamar or Tamar, okay? Doesn't that mean that Messiah wasn't Jewish and all of prophecy is overthrown? No, it doesn't. By the way, that's used. Jesus' genealogy would be incorrect and not allowable. Okay? Well, let me show you that Jesus' genealogy is totally allowable in reference to being a son of David, even though Tamar's in there. By the way, this isn't used too much because it's further back in the genealogy. So you don't want to get in trouble and disrespect David in Jewish circles. Now look at this. This is an interesting passage to kind of mark down somewhere. Leviticus 24:10 through 11. Now the son of an Israelite woman. So here's a guy whose mom's an Israelite, but his dad's an Egyptian. Remember I said last night that a mixed multitude came out of the Exodus, some of which were Egyptians? Well, here's the proof. So I don't think the person who asked the question, I think it was Roxby, isn't with us tonight. So I hope she sees this video. Here's a verse that proves that some of the Egyptians came out and they had intermarried with the Israelites, whose father was an Egyptian, went out from the children of Israel. By the way, I made mention of this passage, but now you know where to find it. Went out from among the children of Israel, and this Israelite woman's son, notice he's not called an Israelite or a Jew, and a man of Israel fought. He is called a Jew, fought together, and the Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed. And so they brought him to Moses, and his mother was named Shalometh, daughter of Debrai, son of Dan. So that gives the tribe. The mother was a son of Dan, okay, but the father was Egyptian. Okay, and there's the instigation. Does Tamar being in Jesus' genealogy overthrow prophecy? No, it doesn't in any way. And so actually what you see there is Jewishness is actually reckoned through the father. The rabbis presently reckon it through the mother. Go figure. Here's the problem with the oral law, but we'll get to that another time. There are places that we'll talk about where some of those seem to violate Torah. So what's with Timothy? So now we have a problem, right? If we reckon through the father, what do we do with Timothy? Well, we need to understand what's going on with Timothy here. Timothy was the son of a Greek or Gentile father. His mother was Jewish, as was his grandmother. However, Paul decided to take Timothy with him on his second journey. Now there's a problem. Timothy is running around Jewish communities, and the big question is, Timothy, who do you identify yourself with? Are you a Greek or aren't you a Greek? Well, Paul says, look, I don't want a lot of problems here. Okay, Timothy, you identify with the one true God. You've got Jewish parentage. Let's just put this whole thing to rest. So he took him and circumcised him because the Jews were in the region and they all knew his father was Greek. See, they're questioning, and Paul doesn't want a lot of questions running around Timothy's parentage and really, can Timothy, enter in here? And who is this Timothy? And this whole problem here. And so Paul says, look, you were raised with a faith, you were raised within Judaism, you identify with the Jewish people. Let's just put this to rest. By the way, this also shows that circumcision is connected not to righteousness, but at least under Mosaic law, had some part to play in identity. So Timothy is, you know, we're not saying it's through the mom and Jesus's genealogy is overturned. What we're saying is Timothy had an option to play and he had a decision to make, and he decides that he's going to identify. So let's talk about the weirdness of Tamar. Have you ever wondered why Tamar's story's in there? You're reading along, you're reading about Joseph, then all of a sudden there's this weird story of Tamar. And, when I read that, I start thinking to myself, well, why is this here? Why is this stuck in the middle here? Some things are placed in your Bible because of their later significance, not because of their immediate significance. So they teach us something about the characters immediately and principles related to negatively or positively following God, or don't do this. This isn't the way to follow God. But they also have ramifications later on. Now, Tamar's story is really a story that it has a lot of significance later. But when she was going through this, she didn't know why she was going through this, other than, some people weren't playing very fair. Okay? She's widowed. Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. So Judah has taken a wife for his son who is a Gentile. In Genesis 38, verse 6, and her name was Tamar. Okay? It's actually a very pretty girl's name. Now, that son dies. So now we have a problem. By the way, he died for doing something God didn't much like, if you read the text. So now you have a woman, she does not have a husband. Who's going to continue the line? Well, now we had this thing called Levirate marriage. Now, a lot of people object to this. This is the stuff that neo-atheists love to jump all over and get all disgusting about and look at your God and how horrible this is. And I'm not saying do this at home. Okay, but there are distinct reasons why, given the nature of Israel and the future of Israel and Messiah coming out of Israel, that God sets up some special protections here. And so rather than lose the line of Judah, which was vital to the fulfillment of prophecy, there was a custom of Levirate marriage. So Judah goes to his next son in line. Go into your brother's wife and marry her and raise up an heir for your brother. So the child born to Onan would not have Onan's name. He would be reckoned as the line of Judah through Understand that. The kid's father is reckoned as the dead brother. It's line. And see, this is the problem. Onan knows that the heir would not be his. So part of his inheritance is going to pass on to his brother, not to his line. And it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife that he practiced an ancient form of birth control. If there are little kids in the room, that's as far as we're going to go with that. I know it's a mixed audience, but it was just an ancient way of doing things, lest he should give his brother an heir. So he's going to not fulfill his duty and risk the loss of a line in Judah and his brother's loss of a line. Okay? That is not cool. So I put up the tree. It may be a little hard to see here, but it'll come up. And you can see here, and I'm going to start getting this ready so that when it does come up, you're going to see the line here. But you're going to end up seeing the Canaanite line here. And then you're going to end up seeing the Abdulites over here. And you can pull this right out of Logos. If you have Logos, you have these neat genealogical charts. Okay. And so you have this whole thing. And you have Tamar. And Tamar's kind of weird here because she's the daughter-in-law. And also, we're going to see she bears relationship to Judah. That's the family line there. Now, I actually have not put the PowerPoint up for tonight. but can very well do that. And you would actually have this genealogical chart. It may not be as clear as I'd like online, but if you have the PowerPoints, you'd always go back. Okay. So you have a family tree here. Now, Onan ends up dying, and Judah's supposed to give his son again, but that's his youngest, younger son. He's already lost two sons in his mind to this gal. And so, to make a long story a little shorter, Tamar dresses up as a prostitute, and Judah decides to visit her as a lady of the evening. This is not real savory stuff, is it? One of the great lessons of the Hebrew Scriptures is God keeps his promises despite our failures, not so much because of all the great wonderfulness of us. And that's a really good lesson for us to end up learning. And so Tamar becomes pregnant. Now here's the thing, okay? Tamar is the daughter-in-law of Judah. He goes back to find the prostitute. She's not there. Why? Because she's his daughter-in-law. Okay, but she keeps two things. Pay time comes. He says, leave your staff and your seal, your signet, your cord. This is what I really want. Tamar is one smart girl. Rather than take money, she takes identifiers that will identify Judah later. 3 months comes. Judah's told Tamar, your daughter-in-law has played the harlot. How dare she? Now remember, she has not had an heir raised to take care of her. And the obligations to her dead husband's line and ultimately her future hang in the balance, because they didn't have a widow's program or pensions back then. And so she's really kind of dependent. She's stuck in this society. And so she's kind of stuck. And so she does this to get Judah to do what Judah should have made sure happened. All right? She's played the harlot. Ooh, that's bad enough. Furthermore, she's with child by harlotry. So Judah said, bring her and let her be burned. That was the penalty back then. That's really ugly, I look at that and it's not real savory to me. And Judah said, bring her and let her be burned. When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law. This is really clever here. Saying, by the man to whom these belong, I'm with child. Oh, here's your stuff, your cord and your signet. I'm pregnant by this guy. Oh, okay. Please determine who these are. Like, duh, she's handing them to the guy that they belong to. And Judah has just enough rightness in him and enough of a conscience and enough of a respect for God that he acknowledges them. She has been noticed. She has been more righteous than I, because I did not give to her Selah, my son. See, that's what he should have done, but he lost the two sons. He said, I'm going to cut my losses. Too bad for Tamar. Too bad for my son's line. I'm not going to do what I'm supposed to do. And then when he's confronted, he says, you know what? This girl was more righteous than I. She knew what my duty was, and I didn't do it. Now, he never knew her again, so this did not become a thing. Okay. But the Levirate marriage provision was ended up being followed. Despite Judah's not doing what he was supposed to do, God still raises the line up. And that's what you need to see here. So, when neo-atheists pull this stuff, it's like, well, wait a minute now. You're judging what these Bible individuals are doing by a 20th century morality that is informed by a Judeo-Christian ethic. That's totally backward. You can't appropriate the things of a Judeo-Christian ethic and use them against the ethic that you're deriving the principles that you're using. That's self-defeating, it's wrong, it's hypocritical. When someone pulls a verse like this out of this, I say, wait a minute now. You really mean to tell me that not knowing the story and why God allowed these things, you're going to take the ethic that came from the worldview that makes these things wrong? Please give me a naturalistic reason why this would be wrong. That's my apologetics pitch during our Bible study. Okay, let's look at the point of this whole thing. These four women together build the case. The story of Tamar is the beginning of building a case that Jesus can represent the Gentiles, since the Gentiles are a part of his story, part of his genealogy. And he's going to build it with a bunch of women. But he takes the strange case of Tamar to start his building of his case. And so Tamar's the first of this case building. Okay. And I'm actually getting back to the beginning of the slide, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to kind of move on. But what he's doing, and we just covered this tonight because I didn't know how long things would take, is he's starting to build his case with Tamar. We're going to look at the other women in here as well. Maybe we'll fit them together. This is a very different way to look at the genealogy. So often we go verse by verse and name by name, and we could have done that. But I didn't do that. What I did is I took the one feature of the genealogy that's out of place to show you that it really was in place given Matthew's intention. By the way, again, when you're looking at the genealogy, look for the authorial intent. Why is this genealogy here? And what's it going to say? And what are the circumstances surrounding this genealogy? So that's what we really have here. And so that's kind of where we're at. Tonight's a little shorter, a little time to go see fireworks. We're actually a little closer to 30 minutes because I really thought Tamar would take a little more time. But you can see the beginning of this whole thing. Now, usually we run a little more towards an hour, and I'll shoot more for that. But I thought that opening the case with Tamar would be a really good thing to do tonight. So we're going to pick up with the other Gentile women in the genealogy and then begin to move into the actual construction of the protection of Messiah and the testing of Messiah and the teaching of Messiah as we move through this. So I know this was a little short, but a happy 4th. I'm thrilled for everyone that tuned in. I hope you got something about genealogies, about Tamar's story, why it's stuck in there, and how really the Hebrew scriptures unfold the idea that God goes to incredible lengths to fulfill his promise, even though we don't do such a good job. And maybe a little apologetic stuff. Oh, good. How do you spell the word for, I'm going to try it. This is transliterated. Sweet Tea asked how you spell it. I actually have a Hebrew keyboard. So I'm going to put mishpucha. This is the way it's usually transliterated. Mishpucha. And I'm going to stick that up there for Sweet Tea. That's the best transliteration that I can do. The sound, mishpucha, is a little hard. What was the reference to Genesis? Okay, I think you're referring to 12, 1 through 3. So I got another question. I love this, though, because you guys are adding to the study here. Although my spell checker didn't like the word Abrahamic. I'm going to stick that in there. Okay. So that's great. I'm just running through to see if there's anything else. Okay. Okay, well, we will be back with a longer study next Thursday. Um, it does look like I won't be going to Shalom, Brooklyn. I had to lay that on the altar. It was really difficult for me. So, be praying God's honored by that, and He'll show me eventually the reasons why and open new ministry doors. Because I don't always understand His reasons. But I just had a check in my spirit, so I didn't. Okay, excellent. Someone said they'll have some questions in the future, so I will look forward to that. And I'm thrilled for everyone who came. For those out watching fireworks, happy 4th. And just tune into it later. And we will pick up exciting stuff next week. We should be back in our arguments against the oral law. And then we'll pick up more in Matthew. Okay, well, I guess I will say good night for tonight. And it was great having you here.